The black SUV pulled up to the curb outside First National Bank on Peachtree Street. It was just another Tuesday afternoon in downtown Atlanta, with people rushing past on the sidewalk, talking on their phones and carrying coffee cups. Nobody paid much attention to the massive figure stepping out of the passenger side. Shaquille O'Neal stood on the pavement for a moment, adjusting his simple white t-shirt and pulling his baseball cap down a little lower. At 7 feet and 1 inch tall, staying invisible wasn't exactly easy, but he'd gotten pretty good at blending in over the years. The key was acting normal, moving casual and hoping people were too busy with their own lives to look up. He walked through the glass doors of the bank, feeling the cool air conditioning hit his face. The place was busy but not packed. A few people stood in line, others sat in chairs filling out paperwork, and the tellers were handling the usual afternoon rush. Shaq glanced around, taking in the marble floors, the high ceiling, and the professional atmosphere. What nobody in that building knew was that this wasn't just any random visit for the big man. 3 months earlier, Shaq had quietly purchased a controlling interest in this entire banking chain through his investment company. The paperwork was all signed, the money had changed hands, and legally speaking, he now owned the place where he was standing. But Shaq wasn't the type to walk around announcing his business deals. He'd learned long ago that keeping a low profile made life easier. When you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars and your face has been on TV for decades, privacy becomes precious. So he conducted most of his business meetings under his legal name, wore regular clothes instead of fancy suits, and tried to move through the world like any other person. The truth was, Shaq had been building his empire quietly for years. While most people remembered him for dunking basketballs and making movies, he'd been busy buying restaurants, investing in technology companies, and putting his money into real estate. He owned dozens of businesses across the country, from car washes to nightclubs to pizza shops. Banking had always interested him. Not the glamorous side that most celebrities gravitated toward, but the real nuts and bolts of how money moved and how communities got served. He'd studied the industry, talked to experts, and spent months looking at different opportunities before deciding to make his move. The First National chain had caught his attention because they focused on working-class neighborhoods. These weren't the fancy banks where millionaires kept their money. These were the places where regular people came to cash paychecks, get car loans, and open their first savings accounts. Shaq liked that. He remembered what it was like to grow up without much money, and he wanted to be part of something that helped people build better lives. Today's visit was supposed to be simple. He needed to handle some paperwork for one of his business accounts, sign a few documents, and maybe chat with the branch manager about some upcoming changes. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention. Just a quick in-and-out visit. He joined the line behind a woman with 2 small kids and an elderly man clutching a handful of checks. The kids were getting restless and their mother kept shushing them while trying to organize her purse. The old man was mumbling to himself about interest rates and bank fees. Normal bank stuff, normal people doing normal things. Shaq pulled out his phone and scrolled through some emails while he waited. His assistant had sent him updates on 3 different restaurant locations. His accountant needed approval for some tax documents, and his foundation director wanted to discuss a new scholarship program. Being rich and famous meant your phone never stopped buzzing. A security guard walked past, nodding politely at customers. A janitor was emptying trash cans near the back wall. 2 loan officers sat at desks, explaining mortgage options to a young couple who looked nervous but excited. It was all very routine, very everyday. The line moved forward slowly. Shaq checked his watch and hoped this wouldn't take too long. He had a conference call at 4 o'clock with some investors in California, and traffic in Atlanta could be unpredictable. Behind him, more customers had joined the line. A construction worker still covered in dust from his job site. A woman in scrubs who looked like she'd just finished a hospital shift. A teenager with his first paycheck, probably opening his first bank account. These were the people Shaq wanted to serve as the new owner. Regular folks just trying to handle their money and build their futures. The teller windows were busy. 5 windows were open, with employees helping customers deposit checks, withdraw cash, and ask questions about their accounts. The tellers looked professional in their white shirts and ties, typing on computers and counting money with practiced efficiency. What Shaq didn't know was that one of those tellers was having the worst day of her career. Betty Rodriguez had been working at this branch for almost 15 years, and she took pride in her job. But today everything seemed to be going wrong. She'd started her shift with a computer system that kept freezing up. Then she'd dealt with 3 difficult customers in a row, including one man who'd yelled at her for 10 minutes about a fee that wasn't even her fault. Her supervisor had been on her case about processing transactions faster, and she was feeling stressed and frustrated. Betty had always been good with people, but when the pressure mounted, she sometimes got defensive. She'd grown up in a tough neighborhood and had worked hard to build a career in banking. Sometimes she felt like people didn't respect her or the work she did, and that made her put up walls. The line kept moving. Shaq was now third in line, then second, then it was his turn. He walked up to window number 3, where Betty was organizing some paperwork and trying to reset her computer for the 4th time that day. He smiled and said good afternoon, just like he would to anyone. But Betty barely looked up. She was focused on her computer screen, muttering under her breath about the technical problems she'd been having. Shaq waited patiently. He understood that people had bad days, and he wasn't in any hurry to make someone's life harder. He'd learned patience during his basketball career, dealing with difficult coaches, demanding fans, and constant pressure. A few extra minutes at the bank wasn't going to ruin his day. What he couldn't predict was that the next few minutes would change everything for both of them. Sometimes the most ordinary moments turn into the most extraordinary stories, and this was about to become one of those times. The afternoon sun streamed through the bank's windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Customers continued their business, tellers kept working, and nobody had any idea that they were about to witness something unforgettable. Betty Rodriguez finally looked up from her computer screen, and her eyes immediately went wide. The man standing at her window was enormous. She'd seen tall people before, but this was different. This guy had to be close to 7 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire window space. Her first thought wasn't recognition, it was suspicion. In her 15 years of banking experience, Betty had developed what she called her radar. She could spot trouble from across the room. People who looked like they didn't belong, people who seemed nervous, people who might be trying to pull something over on the bank. It wasn't personal, she told herself. It was just being careful, and right now her radar was going off like crazy. The man was wearing a plain white t-shirt that looked like it came from a discount store. His basketball shorts were faded and wrinkled. His sneakers had seen better days. But here he was, standing in a bank in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed. Betty had seen this before. Guys who thought their size or their attitude could intimidate bank employees into giving them special treatment. Athletes from the local college teams who expected the world to bow down to them just because they could dunk a basketball. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone already cold. Shaq smiled politely. "Yes, ma'am. I need to make a withdrawal from my business account." Betty's eyebrows went up. "Business account?" She looked at him again, taking in the casual clothes and the relaxed demeanor. In her experience, people with real business accounts didn't show up looking like they'd just finished shooting hoops at the local park. "Okay," she said slowly. "Do you have your account number?" Shaq reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card with the account information written on the back. He handed it to Betty, who glanced at it quickly. The account number looked legitimate, but that didn't mean much. People could fake anything these days. "And how much are you looking to withdraw?" Betty asked. $50,000. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Betty blinked twice, sure she'd heard wrong. 50,000? This guy, dressed like he'd just come from a pickup basketball game, wanted to withdraw $50,000? Her suspicion meter went from yellow to red in about 2 seconds. "Sir," she said, her voice getting louder, "I'm going to need to see some identification." Shaq nodded and pulled out his driver's license. He handed it over without any fuss, still maintaining that patient smile. But Betty barely glanced at the license before her attitude shifted into high gear. "Shaquille O'Neal," she read aloud, making it sound like the most ridiculous fake name she'd ever heard. "Right. And I suppose you're telling me you're the basketball player?" "A few customers in line B." Ken Shaq started paying attention. The woman with the 2 kids stopped trying to quiet her children and started listening. The elderly man with the checks turned around to see what was happening. "Yes, ma'am, I am," Shaq said calmly. Betty actually laughed, not a polite chuckle, but a full-blown dismissive laugh that echoed across the bank lobby. "Oh, this is rich," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "So you're telling me that Shaquille O'Neal, the millionaire basketball star, walks into my bank wearing a $5 t-shirt and wants to withdraw $50,000 in cash? Shaq's smile was starting to fade, but he kept his voice level. Ma'am, I understand this might seem unusual, but if you could just verify the account information. Unusual? Betty interrupted, her voice rising. Sir, what's unusual is people coming in here trying to scam the system. You think because you're tall and you've got a fake ID that says Shaquille O'Neal, we're just going to hand over $50,000. Other customers were definitely watching now. The construction worker had put down his phone. The woman in scrubs was openly staring. Even the tellers at the other windows were starting to glance over. Betty was on a roll now, and all the frustration from her terrible day was pouring out. I've been working in this bank for 15 years, she continued, and I've seen every scam in the book. People like you come in here all the time, thinking you can flash some fake credentials and walk out with other people's money. Ma'am, Shaq tried again. If you could just call your manager, people like me. Betty's voice was getting shriller. Oh, I know exactly what kind of person you are. You probably saw Shaquille O'Neal on TV and thought, hey, I'm tall, I'm black, maybe I can pretend to be him and steal some money from these stupid bank people. The bank lobby had gone quiet. Everyone was watching now, and several people had their phones out. The security guard was walking over, looking concerned but not sure what to do. Shaq took a deep breath. In his playing days, he'd dealt with trash talk from opponents, heckling from fans, and criticism from reporters. He'd learned to keep his cool under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't about basketball. This was about being treated like a criminal for trying to access his own money. Ma'am, he said, his voice still calm but with an edge to it now. I am Shaquille O'Neal. This is my identification, this is my account, and I have every right to make this withdrawal. Betty shook her head dramatically. Right. And I'm Oprah Winfrey. Sir, do you have any idea how insulting this is? You come into our bank, you try to impersonate a famous person, and you expect us to just play along? She turned to the security guard who had reached her window. Frank, I think we need to call the police. This gentleman is attempting to commit fraud. Frank looked uncomfortable. He was a retired police officer who'd been working bank security for 5 years, and something about this situation didn't feel right to him. The big man wasn't acting nervous or desperate like most scammers. He seemed genuinely frustrated but not panicked. Ma'am, Frank said to Betty, maybe we should just call the branch manager. The branch manager? Betty scoffed. Frank, this man is trying to steal $50,000 using a fake identity. We don't need the branch manager. We need the cops. More customers had gathered around now. Some were recording video on their phones. Others were whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. The 2 loan officers had stopped their meetings and were watching from across the lobby. Shaq looked around at all the faces staring at him. Some looked curious, some looked skeptical, and a few looked sympathetic. He realized the situation was spiraling out of control, and he had a choice to make. He could demand to speak to someone in charge. He could pull out his phone and call his attorney. He could even reveal his ownership of the bank and watch Betty's face when she realized what she'd done. But part of him was curious to see how far this would go. How deep was the disrespect? How much would people assume based on nothing but appearance and prejudice? Ma'am, he said one more time, I really think you should call your manager. Betty crossed her arms and glared at him. Sir, the only person I'm calling is the police. You can explain your little scam to them. And with that, she picked up her phone and started dialing. The bank lobby buzzed with tension as customers watched and waited to see what would happen next. Nobody knew it yet, but they were all about to witness one of the most shocking revelations in banking history. The phone call Betty was making wasn't to the police. Not yet. First, she was calling her supervisor, Linda Chen, who worked in the office upstairs. Betty wanted backup before she made this into an official incident. Linda, I need you down here right now, Betty said into the phone, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. I've got a situation with someone trying to impersonate Shaquille O'Neal. While she waited for Linda to come down, Betty turned back to Shaq with a look of pure satisfaction on her face. She felt like she was protecting the bank, doing her job, catching a criminal before he could steal money from hardworking people. Sir, my supervisor is coming down to deal with you, she announced. I suggest you leave now before this gets worse for you. Shaq didn't move. He stood there calmly, his hands folded in front of him, waiting to see what would happen next. Other customers in line were getting impatient. But they couldn't look away from the drama unfolding at window 3. The woman with the 2 kids whispered to her friend on the phone, "Girl, you're not going to believe what's happening at the bank right now." The construction worker was recording everything on his phone, already thinking about posting it online. The elderly man with the checks was shaking his head, muttering about how the world had gone crazy. Frank, the security guard, was standing nearby looking more and more uncomfortable. He'd been a cop for 25 years before retiring, and his instincts were telling him something was off about this whole situation. The big man wasn't acting like someone who was trying to pull a scam. He was too calm, too patient, too willing to wait for management. Linda Chen came hurrying down the stairs, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She was a small woman in her 40s who'd been with the bank for 8 years. She took pride in running a tight ship and handling difficult situations professionally. But when she saw the crowd gathered around Betty's window, her heart sank. This was exactly the kind of scene that could end up on social media and make the bank look bad. "What's going on here?" Linda asked, approaching Betty's window. Betty launched into her explanation immediately. This man came in claiming to be Shaquille O'Neal and demanding to withdraw $50,000 from a business account. "He's got some fake ID and he thinks we're stupid enough to fall for it." Linda looked at Shaq for the first time, taking in his height, his appearance, and his remarkably calm demeanor. Something about the situation didn't add up, but she trusted Betty's judgment. Betty had been with the bank for 15 years and had never caused problems before. "Sir," Linda said to Shaq, "I understand there's some confusion about your identity. Can you show me your identification?" Shaq handed over his driver's license again. Linda looked at it more carefully than Betty had, studying the photo and the details. It looked real, but fake IDs were getting better all the time. "This says Shaquille O'Neal," Linda said. "Yes, ma'am, because that's who I am." Linda looked skeptical. "Sir, Shaquille O'Neal is a famous millionaire. He wouldn't be in here dressed like—" She gestured at his casual clothes. "Like what?" Shaq asked quietly. Linda realized she was about to say something that might sound offensive, so she changed direction. "Sir, if you're really Shaquille O'Neal, surely you can prove it in some other way. How would you like me to prove it?" The question hung in the air. Linda realized she didn't have a good answer. What kind of proof would satisfy her? A basketball? A championship ring? A photo with Michael Jordan? Betty jumped back into the conversation. "He can't prove it because he's not Shaquille O'Neal. He's just some guy trying to steal money." By now, about 20 people had gathered around the scene. Some were bank customers, others were employees from other departments who'd heard the commotion. Everyone had their phones out, recording everything. One customer, a young woman named Ashley who worked at a sports bar downtown, spoke up from the crowd. "Excuse me, but that really does look like Shaq to me." Betty whirled around. "Oh, please. You think every tall black man is Shaquille O'Neal?" Ashley's eyes went wide. "I didn't say that. I said he looks like Shaq because he actually does look like Shaq." Another customer, an older man named Robert, stepped forward. "I've been watching basketball for 40 years, and that's definitely him." "You people are all crazy," Betty shot back. "Shaquille O'Neal is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You think he's going to walk into a random bank in Atlanta wearing a t-shirt from Walmart?" The crowd was starting to take sides. Some people believed it was really Shaq. Others thought it was an elaborate scam. The tension in the room was getting thicker by the minute. Linda tried to regain control of the situation. "Sir, I'm going to need you to provide additional verification. Do you have any other forms of identification? Credit cards? Business cards?" Shaq reached into his wallet and pulled out several credit cards, all with his name on them. He also had business cards from his various company. So Linda examined them carefully, but she was still skeptical. "These could all be fake," she said. "Ma'am, at what point does it become unreasonable to doubt someone's identity?" Shaq asked. "I've shown you my driver's license, my credit cards, my business information, and my account details. Multiple customers have identified me. What more do you need?" Betty was getting more agitated by the minute. The longer this went on, the more defensive she became. She felt like everyone was ganging up on her, questioning her judgment. "I'll tell you what we need," she said loudly. "We need you to stop trying to con us and get out of our bank before we call the police." The words echoed through the lobby. Several customers gasped. The security guard shook his head in disbelief. Even Linda looked shocked at how aggressive Betty was getting, but Betty wasn't done. All the stress from her bad day, All the frustration with difficult customers, all the pressure from her supervisors was coming out now. "I've been working in this bank for 15 years, she continued, her voice rising, "and I've seen every trick in the book. You people think you can walk in here and intimidate us with your size and your attitude, but we're not falling for it." "You people?" Shaq repeated quietly. Betty realized what she'd said, but instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Yes, you people. People who think the rules don't apply to them. People who think they can scam hardworking folks just because they're tall, or think they're tough." The lobby went silent. Everyone could feel the tension crackling in the air. Several customers looked uncomfortable, realizing that Betty's comments were crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. Frank, the security guard, finally decided he'd heard enough. "Ma'am," he said to Betty, "I think we should call the branch manager." "I don't need the branch manager," Betty snapped. "I can handle this myself." But Linda was already reaching for her phone. She realized this situation was spiraling out of control, and she needed someone with more authority to deal with it. "I'm calling Mr. Thompson," she announced, referring to the branch manager. Betty's face went red. "Fine, call him. He'll back me up. We're not going to let some fake celebrity steal money from our bank." Shaq stood quietly through all of this, watching the chaos unfold around him. Part of him was amazed at how far people would go to avoid admitting they might be wrong. Part of him was sad that this level of disrespect and suspicion still existed in the world. But mostly, he was curious to see what would happen when the branch manager arrived. Because unlike everyone else in that lobby, the branch manager would know exactly who owned the bank. The crowd waited anxiously as Linda made the phone call. In just a few minutes, everything was about to change. The phone call lasted exactly 47 seconds. Linda spoke in hushed, urgent tones, explaining the situation to branch manager David Thompson. From across the lobby, people could hear fragments of the conversation. "Yes, sir, he claims to be Shaquille O'Neal." "No, sir, Betty doesn't believe him." "Yes, there's quite a crowd." "Okay, yes, sir, right away." Linda hung up and turned to the assembled crowd. "Mr. Thompson is coming down immediately." Betty looked satisfied. She was sure the branch manager would support her decision and put an end to this ridiculous charade. In her mind, she'd done everything right. She'd protected the bank from a sophisticated scammer, and now management would thank her for her vigilance. "Good," Betty said loudly. "Mr. Thompson will straighten this out. He's not going to fall for this nonsense either." Shaq remained perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back. If you didn't know better, you might think he was meditating. But people who'd watched him play basketball would recognize the look. It was the same expression he'd worn before big games, during crucial moments when everything was on the line. The elevator at the back of the lobby dinged softly, and David Thompson emerged. He was a well-dressed man in his early 50s, wearing a navy blue suit and looking like he'd stepped out of a banking magazine. He'd been with First National for 12 years, and had managed this branch for the last 4. David started walking across the lobby toward the commotion, checking his phone as he moved. He was reading an email that had just come through from corporate headquarters marked Urgent Confidential. The email was about recent ownership changes at the bank. It included photos of the new majority stakeholder, along with instructions about how to handle any visits from the new owner. The email had been sent to all branch managers 3 weeks ago, but David was just now rereading it carefully. As he looked up from his phone and saw the crowd gathered around window 3, David's steps began to slow. Through the gap between customers, he caught a glimpse of the tall figure at Betty's window. David stopped walking entirely. He looked down at his phone again, then back at the crowd. His face went completely white. "Oh no," he whispered to himself. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Linda saw the branch manager approaching and waved him over. "Mr. Thompson, thank goodness you're here. We have a situation that needs your attention." David walked the rest of the way on unsteady legs. As he got closer, he could see more clearly, and his worst fears were confirmed. Standing at Betty's window, surrounded by curious customers and agitated employees, was Shaquille O'Neal. Not someone claiming to be Shaquille. O'Neal. Not someone who looked like Shaquille. O'Neal, the actual Shaquille O'Neal, the same man whose photo was in the confidential email on David's phone. The same man who now owned controlling interest in the entire banking chain. David's mouth went dry. His hands started shaking. In 12 years of banking, he'd never faced a crisis like this. Betty saw the branch manager approaching and launched into her explanation immediately. "Mr. Thompson, this man came in claiming to be Shaquille O'Neal and demanding $50,000. He's got fake identification and he's trying to scam us. I've handled everything professionally and I think we should call the police." David opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He was staring directly at Shaq, who turned and made eye contact with him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson," Shaq said calmly. Mr. O'Neal," David managed to stammer. I had no idea you were visiting today." The lobby went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floor. Betty's confident expression started to crack around the edges. "Wait," she said slowly. "Wait, what did you just call him?" David was sweating now. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his forehead. "Mr. O'Neal, I am so sorry about this misunderstanding. If I had known you were here—" "You know him?" Linda asked, her voice barely above a whisper. David nodded miserably. "This is Shaquille O'Neal, the real Shaquille O'Neal." Betty shook her head violently. No, that's impossible. That's not... He can't be..." But even as she protested, the truth was starting to sink in. The way the branch manager was acting, the fear in his voice, the way he was treating this customer with such deference. This wasn't how you'd react to a scammer. One of the customers in the crowd, Ashley from the sports bar, spoke up. "I told you guys it was really him." Robert, the longtime basketball fan, nodded knowingly. 40 years of watching the game. "I know Shaq when I see him." But Betty was still in denial. "Mr. Thompson, this has to be some kind of mistake. Look at how he's dressed. Look at..." "Ma'am," David interrupted quietly. "Mr. O'Neal can dress however he wants to dress." The weight of those words hit everyone in the lobby at the same time. David wasn't just confirming Shaq's identity. He was treating him like someone very important, someone who couldn't be questioned or challenged. Linda was starting to understand that something much bigger was happening here. "Mr. Thompson, why are you acting like..." David looked around at all the faces staring at him, all the phones recording everything. He realized he was about to reveal information that was supposed to be confidential. But the situation had gone too far to cover up. "Because," David said slowly, "Mr. O'Neal isn't just a customer of this bank." The crowd leaned in closer. Betty's face was getting paler by the second. 3 weeks ago, David continued, Mr. O'Neal's investment company acquired controlling interest in our entire banking chain. He is now the majority owner of First National Bank. The words hit the lobby like a bomb going off. Betty's legs gave out, and she had to grab the counter to keep from falling down. Linda covered her mouth with her hands. Frank, the security guard, closed his eyes and shook his head. Customers started murmuring to each other in shocked whispers. "He owns the bank?" Someone said. "The whole bank?" Someone else asked. "Betty just called the owner of the bank a scammer," Ashley whispered to her friend on the phone. Betty was staring at Shaq with pure horror in her eyes. Everything she'd said, everything she'd accused him of, everything she'd assumed about him, it was all crashing down on her at once. "Sir," David said to Shaq, his voice shaking, "I cannot begin to apologize for what happened here today. This is completely unacceptable and I take full responsibility." Shaq looked around the lobby at all the shocked faces. He'd been curious to see how far the disrespect would go, and now he had his answer, but he took no pleasure in watching Betty's world fall apart. "Mr. Thompson," Shaq said quietly, "I think we need to have a private conversation." David nodded rapidly. "Yes, sir, absolutely. My office is upstairs. We can..." "Actually," Shaq interrupted, "I think I'd like to use your office down here, the one behind the customer." "Service desk." David's eyes went wide. Shaq wanted to stay on the main floor, where everyone could see them talking, where everyone would know that the man they'd just witnessed being humiliated was now calling the shots. "Of course, sir. Whatever you prefer." As David led Shaq toward the office, the lobby remained frozen in stunned silence. Betty was still gripping the counter, staring at nothing. Linda was trying to process what had just happened. Customers were frantically texting and calling friends to tell them what they'd witnessed, and somewhere in the back of everyone's mind was the same question. What was going to happen next? The door to the office closed behind Shaq and David, leaving everyone else to wait and wonder about the consequences of what they'd just seen. The conversation in the office lasted 23 minutes. Through the glass walls, everyone in the lobby could see Shaq and David talking, but they couldn't hear a word. David did most of the talking, gesturing frantically and clearly apologizing over and over. Shaq sat calmly in his chair, occasionally nodding or asking questions. Betty spent those 23 minutes in complete silence. She'd stopped protesting, stopped explaining, stopped defending herself. The reality of what had happened was slowly sinking in, and it was devastating. She'd insulted the owner of the bank. She'd accused him of being a criminal. She'd made assumptions based on his appearance and spoken to him in a way that was not just unprofessional, but deeply disrespectful. Worse, she'd done it all in front of a crowd of witnesses with their phones recording everything. Linda tried to get the lobby back to normal, encouraging customers to continue with their banking and asking employees to return to their stations. But nobody could focus on anything except the conversation happening behind the glass office walls. When the office door finally opened, David emerged first, looking like he'd aged 5 years in 20 minutes. Shaq followed, still calm but with a serious expression on his face. "Everyone," David announced to the lobby, "please gather around. Mr. O'Neill would like to say something." The crowd formed a semicircle around the office area. Phones came back out, recording again. Betty stayed at her window, afraid to move, afraid to get closer, afraid to make eye contact. Shaq looked around at all the faces staring at him. These were the people he wanted to serve as the new bank owner. Regular folks from the community, trying to handle their money and build their lives. Today hadn't gone the way anyone expected, but maybe something good could still come from it. "First," Shaq said, his voice carrying easily across the lobby, "I want to thank the customers who spoke up and treated me with respect today. Ashley, Robert, and several others, you showed kindness to a stranger, and that says a lot about who you are as people." Ashley smiled proudly. Robert nodded with satisfaction. "Second," Shaq continued, "I want to address what happened here today. What you witnessed was wrong. It was disrespectful, it was unprofessional, and it reflected poorly on this bank and everyone who works here." Betty closed her eyes, waiting for the hammer to fall. "But," Shaq said, "it also reflected something bigger than just one person having a bad day. It reflected assumptions and prejudices that exist in our society. The assumption that someone dressed casually can't be successful. The assumption that someone who looks a certain way must be up to no good." He paused, looking directly at Betty for the first time since the revelation. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said. Betty looked up, her eyes filled with tears. "You made some serious mistakes today. You treated me badly and you said things that were hurtful and wrong. In most situations, those mistakes would cost you your job." Betty nodded, accepting her fate. "But," Shaq continued, "I believe in second chances. I believe people can learn from their mistakes and become better. So here's what's going to happen." The lobby was completely silent, everyone hanging on his every word. "Ms. Rodriguez, you're suspended without pay for 2 weeks, effective immediately. During that time, you'll attend sensitivity training and customer service workshops that the bank will pay for. When you come back, you'll be on probation for 6 months. Betty looked shocked. She'd been certain she was getting fired. "But understand this," Shaq said firmly. "This is your only second chance. If anything like this ever happens again with any customer for any reason, you're done. No discussion, no appeal, no exceptions." Betty nodded rapidly, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I'm so sorry." Shaq turned to address the entire group. "I want this bank to be a place where everyone feels welcome and respected, regardless of how they look, how they dress, or where they come from. That starts with how we treat people every single day." David stepped forward. "Mr. O'Neill, what about the rest of the staff? How do we make sure this never happens again?" "Good question," Shaq replied. "First, every employee in this building will go through updated customer service training within the next month. Second, we're implementing new policies about treating customers with dignity and respect. Third, we're creating a feedback system so customers can report problems directly to management." He looked around the lobby again. "But most importantly, we're changing the culture. This bank serves this community, and everyone who walks through those doors deserves to be treated like they matter." Ashley raised her hand. "Mr. O'Neill, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why didn't you just tell everyone who you were from the beginning?" "You could have avoided all this." Shaq smiled for the first time since the incident began. "Because I wanted to see how I'd be treated as just a regular customer. I learned something important today about how this bank operates, and now I can fix it." Robert, the longtime basketball fan, spoke up. So what happens now? Are you going to be involved in running the bank? I'm going to be very involved, Shaq said. This isn't just an investment for me. I want to help build something that serves people better, starting right here, right now. Linda, who had been quiet through most of this, finally found her voice. Mr. O'Neill, what can we do to earn back your trust? Show me, Shaq said simply. Show me through your actions, through how you treat every customer who comes in here. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. He turned back to Betty, who was still standing at her window looking devastated. Ms. Rodriguez, I want to see you in my office next week when you start your training. We're going to have a conversation about respect, about assumptions, and about how we can do better. Betty nodded, unable to speak. David cleared his throat. Mr. O'Neill, is there anything else the staff should know? Shaq thought for a moment. Yes. I want everyone to understand that I didn't buy this bank to make myself richer. I bought it because I believe in community banking. I believe in helping regular people achieve their dreams. And I believe that how we treat people says everything about who we are. He looked around the lobby one more time. Today was difficult for everyone, but it's also an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to be better. I hope we all take advantage of that opportunity. The crowd began to disperse slowly. Customers returned to their business. Employees went back to their stations, and the normal rhythm of the bank gradually resumed. But something had changed. You could feel it in the air. The way people looked at each other, the way they spoke to each other, the way they carried themselves. It was all different. 3 months later, Betty Rodriguez stood in front of a room full of new bank employees telling her story. She'd completed her sensitivity training, excelled in her customer service workshops, and become one of the most respected tellers in the branch. I learned something that day, she told the new hires. I learned that respect isn't something you give to people because of who they are or what they have. Respect is something you give to people because they're human beings. She paused, looking around the room. I almost lost my job because I forgot that simple truth, but Mr. O'Neill gave me a second chance and I've tried to make the most of it. Every customer who comes to my window gets treated like they matter, because they do matter. One of the new employees raised her hand. Do you ever see Mr. O'Neill around the bank? Betty smiled. Oh, yes. He comes in regularly, always dressed casually, always friendly with everyone. And now when he walks through those doors, he gets treated exactly the way every customer should be treated, with dignity, respect, and kindness. She looked out the window at the busy street beyond, where people of all backgrounds hurried past, each carrying their own stories, dreams, and struggles. That's the lesson, she said. Everyone who walks through our doors has a story. Our job isn't to judge that story. Our job is to help them write the next chapter. Outside, Shaq's SUV pulled up to the curb. He stepped out wearing jeans and a t-shirt and walked through the same doors where it all began. But this time something was different. This time, everyone who saw him smiled and said good afternoon. This time, he was treated like what he'd always been, a valued customer and a respected human being, and that, Betty reflected as she watched him enter the bank, was exactly how it should be.